their assignments, actually do all their work. These are the all-stars from the University of North Carolina in Charlotte. And I could not be prouder of them. I think we'll shut the door. So while the other students are on reading day today, I think some of them are studying and some of them are imbibing in alcohol, is my understanding. It's the end of the semester and they've done their classes. These exceptional group of students have put together their research and they've worked all semester on it. And if you could, let's give John, who's our first one up, a great big welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Like she said, I'm John Watson, and today I'm going to try and raise some awareness of the dangers and actions that are taking place on the dark web. So the dark web is defined as the portion of the internet that is intentionally hidden from search engines. It uses masked IP addresses and is only accessible by special applications. Tor, otherwise known as the onion router, is the widest used software to be able to access the dark web, and has 2 million people on it every single day. Some ethical dilemmas are some countries have restricted internet access, and the dark web has no restrictions anywhere. So as long as you're online, you can access anything from anywhere. And services like this Tor browser, it lets you go past these government restrictions and view any website you like, anywhere from Facebook to Twitter or anything like that. Some people also use the dark web to escape tyrannical leadership in their country and to form rebellions. But many malicious acts also occur on the dark web, such as terrorist forums. My point of view is an undergraduate student at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. I'm going to be going through my last semester, next semester, for a degree in computer science with a concentration in cybersecurity. So a little bit of history. In March of 2000, software developer Ian Clark created Freenet, which was the very first software to be able to access the dark web by the general public. And then in 2002, an early version of the onion router, otherwise known as Tor again, was created, which is now the most widely used software. It was actually created by the US Naval Research Laboratory. And it was initially designed to disguise American operatives that were working undercover in other countries. A little bit more history. In 2005, software piracy alone achieved over 34 billion worldwide. And most of that was due to the dark web. And then in 2010, a company named Processive found that the dark web sites contain over 50,000 extremist websites and more than 300 terrorist forums. Also in 2013, the United States intercepted 2 Al-Qaeda chiefs' communications within the dark web. And then in 2013, the FBI shut down the Silk Road, which was the very first and largest marketplace for illicit substances. So this is just a little example. So in the surface web, which is what we all use every day, you can get anywhere from stolen goods on sites such as Craigslist and other marketplaces, and then there's counterfeit medicines. And when you go down a little bit further, illicit drugs are right on the top, since it's one of the first things that you can find on the dark web. And also, it goes down to child sexual exploitation material, malware and cybercriminal services, such as viruses that you can purchase. And then at the very bottom is trafficking of firearms, as you kind of need sources and know people to be able to get those on the dark web. And here's just the overall generalization of the sales in the dark web. As you see, illegal drugs far outweighs everything else. Way behind it is prescription drugs, and at the very end is non-drug related items, such as fake money, ebooks, and credit card data. So this is my favorite slide, the whole presentation. It's really eye-opening about what your information is being sold for. This is from Experian Credit Reporting, a study they found. So you can get someone's social security number on the dark web for as low as $1, and that alone is enough to ruin someone's life. You can get a credit or debit card for $5 to $110, and you can even get passports and medical records. So how would you buy items on the dark web? So every single purchase is made through cryptocurrency. The largest at the moment is Bitcoin. The current value is a little over $7,000 as of yesterday. Some other forms of cryptocurrency are EOS, Litecoin, and Cardano, because there are starting to become exploits to where Bitcoin is not as untraceable as it used to be. As we all know, Bitcoin isn't only used on the dark web. Anybody can download an app like Coinbase and invest in it themselves. And the real reason Bitcoin is so secure is because all you need is an address for people to send you money, and all you need is an address for other people to send other people money. And there's no real easy way to trace how that Bitcoin is being shared. Address. Yes. It's like a 24-digit long, just random numbers, so you can't just like easily send it. So how would somebody safely browse the dark web? The first thing you would need to do is download a VPN. Otherwise, you're vulnerable to if you access any kind of forum, they can see your IP address and find out a little bit more information about you. So what VPNs do is they mask your IP address. There are some that rotate this VPN every 30 seconds or so where like it makes it even more difficult because your location, as they're seeing it, is changing constantly. The two most popular are NordVPN and ExpressVPN, but they're not all the same. There's regular and then there's logless. If you're using a regular VPN, they're tracking what you're doing 24/7. So if you were to commit a criminal act, yes, ma'am. The NordVPN and ExpressVPN, if you were to use them, they would have logs of everything that you were doing using their software. Yes. It is their data, but if you were to commit a crime, the government can get a warrant to look at those logs and see what you were doing. But some are completely logless, so there's no tracking at all of whatever you're doing. Those are more expensive, and they're a little bit harder to get.
Have you tried? Are they legal?
The VPNs are completely legal, and so is browsing on the dark web. What'd you say?
Logless ones are also legal?
Yes. They cost more, though. Probably, well, a regular VPN could cost you anywhere from $10 to $30 a month, and a logless one could probably double that.
I spent $100
100? So this is an example of the first Silk Road. There's now on the Silk Road 2, which I believe has already been taken down. This is just an example of the homepage. It's not just drugs. You can go anywhere from electronics to fireworks, as well as digital goods. A little bit about gray hat hackers. In February of 2017, a single hacker claiming to be from Anonymous was responsible for the collapse of 20% of the entire dark web. That 20% was being hosted by a server called Freedom Hosting 2, which contained over 10,000 websites, mainly containing child pornography. When all data from this website was released, there were thousands of unverified government emails, which could possibly mean that there were government officials using this website for exploitation. And Anonymous is also responsible for the collapse of Freedom Hosting 1. And this is just, it's a little blurry, but it's a little excerpt. It's the only one I could find from the homepage after it was hacked. It says, "Hello, Freedom Hosting 2. You have been hacked." It says, "We're disappointed. You said that you don't support child exploitation at all." And at the bottom, it says you can actually contact Anonymous. And at the very bottom, it actually lists a link to how exactly they did it, and if they were to bring it up again, how you would take them down. So who is harmed on the dark web? Victims of identity fraud, murder, and even torture in certain cases. Over 60,000 Americans have been affected by identity theft. Stolen goods are sold on the surface web as well. Like I said earlier, on sites like Craigslist, you don't need to go on the dark web to get these stolen goods. And software companies lose millions a year just to pirating alone. Who benefits? Many people use the dark web just to browse safely because you can't be tracked by any government or company as long as you're using the correct means like VPNs. And some are trying to escape oppressive means in their countries. But like I said, people just seek anonymity, and the Facebook dark website alone has reached 1 million users in 1 month. In conclusion, the dark web can be a terrible and awful place with actions occurring that are very malicious, but it also is very beneficial to people in other countries. And we can actually use the dark web to track threats to our country and people. So the real question is, even if we had the option to take it down, should we? Thank you. Are there any questions?
What makes it dark?
What makes it, I guess they call it the dark web because it's supposed to be out of the light. You can't be tracked, and it's kind of not well known. It's supposed to be untraceable, so I guess kind of in the dark.
I mean, it still uses TCP/IP and the web UDP and standard techniques.
Mm-hmm. I believe so. Yes, ma'am.
If the Europeans can take personal information off, why can't we, when the information has not been posted, published, or in any way authorized by the owner?
Okay, so in a lot of cases, people will go out of their way, like phishing, to mine your personal data, and then they'll actually go in the forums on the dark web and sell it for money themselves. So the actions being taken to get your information aren't always legal. A lot of times they can be exploitative.
But what about our Fourth Amendment constitutional rights to privacy? Why don't we have that? I mean, the government can do something.
It's very difficult on the dark web. It's very difficult to trace and find out where things are happening. Could you reword your question for me?
Well, I have talked to some experts who said a do not post, do not publish list, similar to a do not call list, is technically feasible. And I don't know why we can't get the government to at least impose a do not call, do not publish, do not post list so we can protect our privacy that way.
Well, there are some instances of that already in case, but I believe that there's always going to be people that are going to go around the law and break the law to get your information, and those are the real people that we're going to have to worry about. And we're going to have people looking for companies and individuals like that 24/7.
You still can't live without
Scare the young folks, yeah.
It's an option.
Not if you want a job.
Are there any other questions? Yours, sir.
So I kind of have about 2-3 questions, but I'm just gonna go with one. We might not have time.
Okay.
So you showed different layers of content on the dark web. When you access it at first, does it give you like everything, or you have to do more to get access to the different content?
Okay, so a big thing about the dark web is there's no actual search engine that searches every single website. Any search engine that you get on the dark web it's a predefined list because you can't search for a website. You have to have the exact link to get to any kind of website, any kind of .onion site. So that's why it's really secure, because you could make a website and only give it to one person, and the chances are nobody except for that one person is going to be able to ever find that website, because there's no search engines that go across the entire dark web.
And you were also kind of talking about information being sold on the dark web. And if you are already on it and you're, for example, trying to buy something and you don't have Bitcoins, are you going to enter your information there to try to?
There's never any kind of input for any kind of credit card tracing, because even if you pay with your own credit card, that's going to be traceable back to them, so they would never let you buy anything with a credit card or PayPal or anything like that.
And finally, he was talking about connections, TCP, IP. How is the method of encryption if it's the dark web to access it? How kind of method of encryption or connection they're using to make it work?
I'm pretty sure it's the same connection. The real security is behind the fact that you have to have the exact URL to access that website. So if you were to spread it to a certain group of people, the only kind of security leak that you would get is if someone told someone else or someone sent someone else the link. There's no way that another person would access that link. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
My name is Lorenzo Williams, and I want to talk to you today about data collection. I want to start this off with this quote: "Personal data is often compared to oil. It powers today's most profitable corporations." That is by Louise Matsowski. You'll see some more information from her later on in the presentation, but it basically drives in that data powers everything today, especially on the internet. All right, so today we'll be talking about the not so bad data collection. The previous presentation, we talked about the dark web. That's a form of data collection, but today we want to talk about the data collection that happens on social media, the Internet of Things, shopping, even at the DMV. What kind of information do they want? They want your addresses, phone numbers, names, incomes, who you're married to, things like that. And it's mainly used to target ads and also to power AI, which runs social media. And then where does information go? It goes to gigantic databases. Zaba Search is one of them. It's called a public information database, where you can put in someone's name and find out pretty much everything about you. Then also the credit score. So credit bureaus also use this public information. And then ad agencies. That's the biggest one. So all the ads that you see on your social media, all the ads that you see that just pop up on your web browser, they're probably targeted to you from something that you've done on the internet. And then we also have Axiom. And so this is one of the largest databases for your information. They have your health records, they have who you're married to, they have your income, they have your first name, they have your children's names, and all of it is connected to you. So some questions that we want to answer today. Is personal data collection a form of robbery? And we also want to answer the different types of data collection that exist. So the type of problem, based on Drucker, this would be an early manifestation of a new generic problem. And basically what that means is that data collection in its modern form is new, but data collection is very old. The most modern version of data collection, the oldest one, would be the census that was first collected. And then, like I said, done in the 1800s. So some assumptions. People do not feel that their personal data is private, which they shouldn't. And your data is yours, and it's worth something. The point of view, I am a computer science student at UNCC and a victim of data collection, as everyone else is. If you don't believe it, you can just type your name in Google and see what comes up. It's pretty scary. Some history. Mr. Halverson invented a tabulating machine, which processes data. That was the census in 1890. And then the US government and corporations used mainframe computers to analyze and process American citizen data. And then that sparked the Naked Society by Vance Packard, which argued that our privacy is being eroded quickly, and he was very right. In 1990, the Lotus Corporation created the Lotus Marketplace, which held 120 million people's names, addresses, incomes, and other information about them. And then in 1999, DoubleClick wanted to de-anonymize its ads by merging with Abacus Direct, which is a data broker. And a data broker is who would have your information and steal it. And they trade it back and forth. And then Google buys DoubleClick in 2008, and in 2016, Google revised DoubleClick's policy to permit personally identifiable web tracking using personal information collected by Google services. Ethics. It is not ethical to bury data collection procedures in terms and agreements, which is what happens. So you mentioned right here that in the last presentation, how did they do it? It's because when you click agree, you would no longer own whatever you put into that. So whether you're on social media or Amazon, whatever is on there is just theirs now, so they can do what they want with it. And then it is not ethical to lie or omit intentions a company has with your users' data, so your data. Themes, greed. Companies want to capitalize on your information, and transparency. Companies should be transparent about what they are doing with the information that you give them. And in conclusions, your personal data is yours, and you have the right to decide what you want to have done with it. And companies should be more transparent with their customers about how they're using your data. And it's significant because if you knew where your data was, you probably wouldn't want it there, so you could remove it. And companies would start having to have some sort of incentive for you agreeing to share their data. And thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Poniewicz, and it's an honor to be here today. I'm hoping that we can just spread a little bit of enlightenment on the history and science of quantum computing and what that means to cryptography, and then hopefully we'll have some good discussion about the ethical implications and applications of it in the future. So before you guys say, like, wow, he must be talking about quantum computing, he must really know a lot about quantum mechanics, I'd love to go to my first quote from a very renowned physicist. If you think you understand quantum mechanics, then you don't. So that's the point of view I'm coming from. I'm a college student. I love thinking through mechanical physics and quantum physics, but I can't admit to you today that I'm an expert on it, but we'll go through it and what it means for cryptography. So let's go through the history. Oh, there it is. So let's go through a classic example of cryptography. Does anybody know what this is? Just off of the picture. Does anybody want to discuss it? Yep, and then what's a great example of that in history? Julius Caesar, right? Caesar uses this. This is the Caesar cipher, where it's a 3-letter substitution. So that's actually what I was going to before. So hello world, if you substituted that, you get Kor Zurog, all right? And then so that's a common cipher, just to give you one example of one. And then so we have cryptography, cryptography, but let's talk about quantum computing. So just before recently, the only computing is recent too, but now we have something called quantum computing. If you could see here, we have bits, 1 and 0, that's our basic Boolean algebra, 1, 0, on, off. Now we have something called qubits, and it's the same fundamental difference. What makes bits run on traditional computers, qubits is what makes quantum computers work. So who can name a few differences between bits and qubits? We have any physicists here, any aficionados?
You can occupy the same space at the same time, not opposites.
Yeah, exactly. That's superposition, right? So that's one of the key factors about quantum computing is the superposition. So exactly what you're talking about. 1 and 0, that's how you can see it changing colors. A superposition of a qubit is it can attain the value of anything in between 0 and 1, which can be basically an infinite amount of values, right? Another key factor is entanglement. So that's when you have 2 qubits and they're basically entangled. And if you really want to get far out there, that's where some of the quantum teleportation algorithms come from. But that's a whole nother discussion. But basically, if you measure 1 qubit,
What is the physical realization of a qubit?
Physical realization of a qubit is like the phosphorus molecule where it has 2 electrons around it. When you basically bring that phosphorus molecule down to absolute 0, they use some crazy technology for that, but you bring it down to absolute 0, there's no energy acting on the electrons, and then the only energy acting after that is what you physically put in there. So through that energy transition is you can transfer basically data through those electrons instead of through just an electric transistor as compared to a traditional bit.
So what you're transmitting is a fractional value from 0 to 1?
It's a probabilistic value.
Yeah.
We call it 0.5 if it's 50% chance of being 0, 50% chance of being 1.
You don't know what you're doing.
And then at observation time, it collapses into 1 of them.
Are you aware of Schrodinger's equation, or Schrodinger's cat? Yeah, where it's like you don't know if the cat is alive or dead until you check what's in the box. It's basically what it's talking about qubits. So excuse me for a second.
Phosphorus molecule is an example where I can put pieces of energy in its sort of dual state.
Well, that's the dual state is with the entanglement. So like when you have those 2 electrons right there, when you measure the value, or it's with qubits or with that phosphorus molecule, it's either the positive or negative spin, that's 1 or 0, but it's spinning so fast and it's positive, negative, positive, negative. When you measure that, it's either going to be positive spin or negative spin.
So it suggests tumbling rather than spinning.
Yeah, and then so where the probability comes to it is what's the probability that it's going to be measured as a positive spin? What's the probability that you're going to do a negative spin? And through that mathematics, you can get some crazy algorithms in science that traditional bits just don't have the opportunity to compute. In some cases, yeah, that's actually a great question. That's where some new science is going into true random number algorithms through quantum computing. I think right now the most truly random, I think you can allude to this, Tobias, too, is that lava lamp algorithm.
Yeah. So one of the leading things that ends up creating about 25% of the random number generators for all internet traffic to make things secure is there's this company that has a giant wall of lava lamps, and then they take a video of it, and they take pixel values and an algorithm on it. And that's how they create that true randomness to give people like actual, pretty much unhackable recurrent technology encryption for anything.
Fascinating stuff, right? All right, so now let's talk about a little bit of the history of cryptography. So right here, I'm sorry. All right. So we have ancient Egypt. So cryptography has been around for us forever. Ever since there have been humans, we've naturally wanted to hide stuff from other humans. I'm sure everybody has an example of that in their day-to-day lives. So let's start with ancient Egypt. We have hieroglyphics here. And then, of course, when people write on hieroglyphics, it's in a clay stone. And so one of the first examples of cryptography is instead of writing the actual symbol that you would write, you would do a different symbol. And that stumped people for a lot longer than you would think. And then people started to understand that, started to capture the patterns of these scribes, and then it was basically broken. That was the first cryptographic break. But actually, even before that, we have something from Mesopotamia, ancient Mesopotamia, and you basically have a stick, and then you have a long sheet of, just a long sheet where they would write it in. But instead of writing from one sheet to another, you would roll it around the stick, and then you would write based on that stick. So when you unravel it from the stick, it basically looks like gibberish or chicken scratch. But a common break, some very smart people in ancient Mesopotamia would just have a bunch of different length sticks on the ground and just keep whooping it up until they found something that's legible. So that was also broken. And then, of course, we have the Caesar cipher. So one can obviously think about ways that can be broken. You just keep transitioning it letter by letter until you find something that's legible, or just by context, too. And then, of course, after that, these are also just classic examples. There's much more examples, as you guys may know. But we have Alan Turing's Enigma machine, and a pivotal point in World War II for us, where he used one of the first actual computers to break cryptographic code, and that was a fundamental pivot point for cryptography. So I'll let you guys just read that real quick. I'll take a sip. So next, this is more modern cryptography stuff. We have someone by the name of Claude Shannon, and he's known to be the father of the information age for basically two reasons. So we have information theory, and that was in 1945, and he basically defined cryptography as two main points, with secrecy and authenticity. So does anybody want to take a guess what secrecy means and what authenticity means in this case? Anybody? All right, so secrecy is basically what we've been talking about before, is you want to keep it secret. But what about if you receive something secret from somebody? How do you know it's really coming from you? Let's say you write to me something secret, and you want to give it to me. But how do I know it's you sending it? It's not maybe Dr. Johnson over there or somebody else who's trying to manipulate to be you. That's where authenticity comes from. So you would have a personal signature that only you know, but I can verify. So that's where authenticity comes from. And that was a fairly new point in 1945. And then we come to actual security. So we have unconditional security and practical security. So ever since then, unconditional security, we would have that stick thing, right? And then I talked to you about how people would have sticks and then we would break it. And then we would move a little bit in the cryptographic progress. And then we would have the Caesar cipher, we would move a little bit more. That's unconditional securities, where you try to make a system based on the power we have today. But practical security, what Claude Shannon was thinking about is, why are we only building systems that we think are going to be safe now? What about 1,000 years from now? What about 100,000 years from now? Why can't we make something that's going to be always safe, or at least try to? So that's what he was trying to allude to with unconditional security, is that is to try to make a cryptographic system that's always going to be safe. Try to always think about that your attacker is going to have unlimited computing power. And then from that, we have, of course, encryptions, and that's what most cryptographic power is going to today. So we have a very common encryption called RSA, and that was from MIT in 1977 from these three guys over here, Rivest, Shamir, and Adelman. And then, of course, we have AES, that's the American Encryption Standard, and that was in 1998 by Riesman and Dahmen. And those are some of the encryptions you use today. When you swipe a credit card, when you buy something online, odds are you're going to be using one of these two or either DES, which is a subsidiary of AES. So now let's talk a little bit about quantum computing. So Paul Benayev, I believe, was one of the, there's of course a lot of people in this too, but this is just for the context of quantum computing and cryptography. So Paul Benayev proposed the first model of a quantum computer in 1980. So he didn't have the technology to actually make a quantum computer, and that's the beautiful thing about science in general, is you can come up with the theories, and then it's only later down the line where it can actually be proved right, which I think is something really fascinating with how the human brain works, is we can think about something before we even know it can be true, which is really something great. So he proposed it, really stirred up a lot of discussion in the scientific world, and then we have somebody by the name of Richard Feynman, that great quote from before, and Yuri Manin. So they basically theorized that quantum will handle the other problems, and what they quoted is problems that traditional computers will never be able to touch. You know, those crazy math problems that no matter how many traditional bits a computer can have, its odds are that these problems won't be able to be handled by traditional computers. And then comes along a guy by the name of Peter Shor, basically one of the founding fathers of quantum computing and cryptography. I don't know if this was his goal when he was making the algorithm, but he basically came up with what's now known as Shor's algorithm, and that's the most efficient factoring and discrete log problem back in 1994. So who thinks this might be an issue, or why it might be an issue in terms of encryption? Does anybody know why? Yeah, exactly. And especially RSA, right? That's all about log problems right there. Do you want to explain it a little bit?
Well, basically, you have a very big number, and which happens to be the product of two primes. And you send the person some information of one of those two numbers, and you know the rest of it, and they can use that to encrypt it, and then you know the other number, which allows you to decrypt it. And finding a big number and all these primes is very, very hard to do. You know, and so they basically take advantage of the fact that it takes forever to figure out what that other number is.
Exactly correct. I'm glad I asked you to explain it. Took a lot off my back. So anyways, he's exactly correct. That's, if I go back a slide, that's exactly how RSA works right there, is through that log probleming. And then, so that's a huge issue, of course, is because the whole, as you said, RSA is built upon that traditional computers can't find the prime numbers fast enough for that security key to last. So that's a huge issue. And then, of course, we have Love Grover, who came up with Grover's algorithm, and that's the best database search algorithm we have. So it's a classic problem in computer science called the unordered search problem. So if I have, let's say, 5 jelly beans on the ground, and one of them is green, the rest are red. Let's go with Christmas colors, right? It's December. So one of them is green. What's the best way of finding that, what did I say, green? Yeah, that one green jelly bean. So naturally, you think we would have a better way than just searching through each single jelly bean, but that's actually the most efficient algorithm we have with traditional computers, at least, is that n amount. So if I have n jelly beans, it's going to take me n amount of searches to find that one and prove that there's that one green jelly bean. But with Grover's algorithm, using that quantum computing, what we're talking about with entanglement, if I know one of the jelly beans is red and it's entangled with another jelly bean, then I know that jelly bean is red too. So you can infer that instead of it being n searches, it's going to be the square root of n. So that's a huge, maybe not with 4 jelly beans or 6 jelly beans, but what about 20 million jelly beans? That's a lot of jelly beans. But it's a huge cut down from what we have today with traditional computers. So here's a great table. It's the best one I've been able to find about each common encryption we have. So we have AES, we have GMAC, Poly 1305, SHA, of course, RSA, just some common encryptions. Their function, and then this is their pre-quantum security level. So usually it's by their bit size. So AES 128, it's going to be 128, 256, 256 respectively. But if you could just take a look at some of these in the bottom, these are the really most important ones. Almost every public key cryptography system, if you're aware of public key, basically each person has a private key and a public key. What I was talking about, the signatures, you would have a private key that you would sign it with, and then I could verify it with your public key. That's where that cryptography basically comes from. And with Shor's algorithm, it basically breaks all of them. So it's really fascinating. And with AES and Grover's algorithm, it's not technically broken, but now we can find those solutions a lot faster based off of Grover's algorithm. So I'll let you take a look. No impact. So yeah, here I'll actually get to that in a second.
In your earlier previous discussion about
Data mining?
finding the green.
Oh, the jelly beans, yes.
Is the fact that it's the square root the function of the fact that we're dealing with two states? In the quantum algorithm,
It's just like the fact that you're using a quantum computer means you use a different algorithm. That and square root of it is just part of the time complexity, so you can just have better functions with the tools.
Where you is the time complexity. Is that theory I'm looking for? Could it be the cube root? What would you have to adjust to make the root?
Perhaps if we can entangle more than two qubits together, but it's that entanglement that gives it more than two states. They have infinite states, basically, with the superposition, because it's not that I know this is one state and that's that other state. It's basically that they're the same state. That's the science behind it, is that they're always going to be the same state since they're entangled.
There could be other algorithms that go from n to the fourth to n. It's just, it's unrelated to the 2-bit part of it. It's just that if you're in a different system, you can write different algorithms that are more efficient.
We can definitely come back to it too. And then what you were saying with the GMAC and Poly 1305, if we go to my good friend Claude Shannon again, he was coming up with that unconditional security. These are some of the algorithms that assume that the attacker has unlimited computing power. So they're a little bit slower to encrypt and decrypt, but with that you get a huge safety net that nothing's really going to be broken by that, at least not by quantum computing or anything we have right now, at least. So what are my recommendations? What can we do? So the first one is we can switch from a standard AES 128 to AES 256. There's not much time impact on that. You would think so. It's doubling the bit size. Excuse me, but it's really not that much of a time impact. So as you can see right here, AES 128 to 256. Now we're back to AES 128's pre-quantum security level, so it's like nothing ever changed. That's probably the most efficient route of going about this, but also we can use those unconditional security. Maybe that should be our new standard, is to use these unconditional security algorithms so we can have less stress in our lives and we can have more trust throughout society about our encryption algorithms. So that's something like GMAC and Poly 1305. So like I said, unlimited computing power. And then another thing, just with the ethical implications of it, I think we should have a lot more awareness and incentive to update and change. I'm a huge victim of this. I'll go on Amazon and put my debit card in there faster than any of you can, I'm sure. I buy a lot of stuff on Amazon, and I don't think another second about it. I don't know if any of you do too, but I trust every single website. If it's got that little lock on my web browser, I trust it with my life, at least with my financial life. So definitely we should have a lot more awareness and maybe be more cautious in the future with how we spend and how we use our finances online, digitally, even swiping credit cards or anything of that source. So that's a great transition to my conclusion and significance. So as I was going about with that credit card, everything uses encryption now. You know, we're based off of trust and privacy. And what's going to happen if there's if we're all still using RSA and maybe quantum computing does reach that level where people do break our encryption and are able to get our credit cards more than they can now. What does that mean for society? You know, how can we regain that trust from other people? if we're always using credit cards and whatnot and then they become broken, are we ever going to regain that trust with society, or are we actually going to regress financially in how we spend money? So that's definitely something to think about. And as leaders here and computer scientists, it's our duty to use these ethical awarenesses to steer how we drive the future. So yeah, thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Yeah, I'm sure. Yes?
At what point are quantum computers feasible to actually do this, break this encryption? We've only got a few bits.
I think we're at 80 qubits right now. Is either IBM's or Google's right now. Is we're up to 80 qubits, and that's a great question. And the other question based on that is the factoring is the error, acceptance error, because when you're working with qubits, you're basically cooling them down to absolute zero, and sometimes you might have other alternate energies in there manipulating your data. So that's a great question. This is certainly something in the future, but just how bits transition to, we had 1 bit, we had 2 bits, and then suddenly we had 400 bits, and then it just keeps going. If you look at the graph over time of how many transistors we had in a CPU chip, it rose exponentially. So I think based off of those trends, we should certainly think about quantum computing's implications now rather than later.
So, but there's a cost to this. So I actually am not laying awake at night worrying about somebody building a quantum computer just to crack my credit card, because the cost of these machines is still.
Oh, absolutely, but you can certainly rent one for very cheap.
Well, you can get online and use the quantum computing simulator for IBM, right? But that's still in the simulation.
No, they run off. So there's websites you go to and you can rent computing power off of an actual quantum computer. It's just they haven't gotten to the state where you can run these things efficiently. This is the thing where somebody builds someone a quantum computer, sets it up in a warehouse, and then people can get paid to run their algorithm.
And when is that going to happen?
I mean, you can do it right now. It's just they haven't hit a point where it's powerful.
Yes.
Yeah, we definitely haven't hit.
We should have cut out the credit card, I guess, as well.
Yeah, we're all very safe online right now, but just definitely something to think about in the future. And then if we are going to make those switches based on our encryptions, how long is that going to take to be an international phenomenon? You know what I mean? Like maybe the newest banks, they all change their encryptions, but what about the mom and pop shop in a village somewhere? Are they going to change their point of sale encryption on their old rinky-dink credit card thing, or is that something we should think about now so we can have it in effect and be prepared, so when it does come to that time, we're already ready for it? Are there any other questions? Well, thank you guys so much. It's been a great honor. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abel Pinales, and I'll be talking about the Internet of Things. So, does anyone want to take a guess on what the Internet of Things is? Anyone in the audience?
Is that most devices that are connected to the Internet or have Internet capabilities?
Yes, to some extent. That also, well, as Google defines it, is the interconnection of internet computing devices embedded in everyday objects, enabling them to send and receive data. So it's basically machine-to-machine communication. And so, but in layman's term, what is Internet of Things? It's just some sort of communication to a machine, to another machine, to send and receive data. So this includes smart TVs, smart fridges, Alexas, smart doorbells, things generally college students can't afford or shouldn't be able to afford. But what can college students afford? This includes smartphones, laptops, Raspberry Pis, and Arduinos. These are also accessible things. So this video, which we're going to skip over just due to time, the user is able to play music on a flute. The machine at home takes the input, the notes of the flute, and controls different parts of his house, allowing the machine of the microphone to speak to other machines within his house to automate everything. So a brief history on Internet of Things, a timeline. So the first telegraph was sent in 1884, and that was the first instance of machine-to-machine communication. It was just the first instance of a telegraph. Following that, the X10 home automation was made in 1970, but everything was still connected through wires, so it's not home automation as we know it today. The first wireless cell phone call was made in 1973, allowing people to communicate wirelessly, but that still did not give us access to machine without any cables involved in between. The first text message was sent in 1992. This allowed for just strings of text data to be sent to other machines using some sort of wireless network. And then finally, Zigbee Alliance used the 2.4 gigahertz range in 1988, allowing home automation as we know it today, such as your Amazon Alexa, or your Ring doorbell, or your Google Home, to communicate. But it would take a lot longer before we would get those kinds of applications. So what are some problems with Internet of Things? The data collection is one of the major problems with it. So Forbes published an article around 2016 talking about how Angry Birds was somehow able to collect sexual orientation of people and how that became a very big problem with it. I'm not sure exactly how throwing a bird across and hitting pigs accumulates the sexual orientation, but somehow they were getting that information, which led to a very big wonder on like how much information is my phone caring about me. This also shows like the certain phones and certain TVs, during commercials, it will play a signal seeing if you are listening to the commercial and how that responds to you. In 2016, the FCC tried to shut it down, but in certain malls, we won't be able to hear it, but those signals are still being sent out to make sure that we are actually in those malls and they can track our location, how much time we're spending in the malls, and whatnot, looking at certain things in relation to our positioning. And that brings us to this quote, which is, "War taught us much. Humanity needs to surrender its freedom willingly in order to enjoy simple pleasures of life." So a lot of us don't read the terms of service. We just click accept. We just want to move on with our lives. But at the moment we click accept, we are losing a lot of information. It's no longer in our hands, and they can take care of this. Though not all of this is always bad. So for example, if you have a Keurig and it knows exactly how to make your coffee, you'd be pretty happy about that. But if it's collecting other things, such as WeVibe, which is an adult company, and it was collecting information on users that they didn't know, they didn't sign anything. And so this was taken to court by NP versus WeVibe, and that just became a very big problem on the amount of data that it's collecting. And again, there was a recent case today that was proven to be false, but it still scared a lot of people, that there was a couple, they were having a dispute, and apparently Alexa had called the police and let them know that, hey, we're in trouble. A lot of people are taking that at face value and saying, Amazon Alexa is always listening. Whereas if you know that how it works, it's always listening, but it's not sending that data to Amazon, and it can't react unless it hears the keyword, Alexa, do X, Y, Z. So, but that's always something on someone's mind. You know, your phone is always listening. I mean, if it's willing to listen to the music in the mall or commercials on TV to send that information back to companies, then what else is also listening to us? There's also big problems, such as the example of John Deere. They were putting a paywall on the tractors that people were buying. So after every year, they would have to pay another subscription, which meant that farmers could no longer use this. Apple also did something similar where they were suing people who were trying to jailbreak their iPhones. It wasn't until recently the Digital Millennium Act that allowed people to use their own software on machines that they bought. So a paywall can be both bad and good. Paywall can mean that we are increasing the product, we are moving it forward, we're putting more money into investing in these things. A paywall can also mean that even though we're not expanding the life of the product, you're still giving us money. So I'm not doing any work on it, but you still have to pay me in order to use my product, which many people may see that as unfair. And that is a list of my sources. Are there any questions?
Hello, everyone. My name is Tobias Fischer, and I will be presenting on the unprovability of machine learning. I do think that is hysterical. So who am I? I'm Tobias Fischer, and I'm a computer science undergraduate junior at University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And I also have some experience training neural networks and a fair amount of experience collecting and labeling training data for neural networks. So I've spent a little bit of time in this space before. So what is machine learning? Well, it's a subset of artificial intelligence, as you can see here. So you have AI, and then you have machine learning, and then deep learning and neural networks is a subset of machine learning. And machine learning is just anything where a system can learn and improve without being explicitly programmed. So a lot of the time is feeding it data and having it become better over time so that it can do a task better. So what does this mean? Well, in classical AI, you have human-readable instructions. So this is something that you can go through and you can follow every instruction, and in theory, you should be able to figure out what it can do fairly easily and what it's going to decide. Where in machine learning, it's all about training agents. And so machine learning's instructions are no longer human-readable. You know, it's built this thing up over time, and you can't really interpret it anymore the same way that you can with a classical AI. So how do you go about proving the system? With the classical AI, you built the system, and you know it makes sense. It has a logical flow to it. But when it's built and changing over time, how do you know an agent works? How do you test for things like regression? And how do you make sure that you're not vulnerable to malicious attacks? So one of the most common solutions is in neural networks is splitting up your training data into training, validation, and test sets. So you train on a certain set of data, and then you evaluate what's called a loss function, and you test how well it did. But the issue is that sometimes you get this thing called overfitting, which is actually shown on this graph here, where this validation data is staying level, but this training data is going on. So it's optimizing for this training set. So you have to validate it somehow. And then the test set is making sure that you don't get a bias toward your validation set when you're changing your model structure. Another way is, an example of this is with Tesla shadow mode. So Tesla cars have autopilot features where the car can drive itself. And their application of autopilot uses machine learning. And they cannot have mistakes happening with this autopilot because mistakes by the autopilot is costly not only to the car, potentially to the human life, but also the public image of the company. And so how do they prove these autopilots without causing accidents? We're not going to watch the video, but in essence, the way they do it is they train a neural network, a model, and they have it running and making decisions, but they don't actually let the car act on those decisions. So they can make some decisions, but it doesn't actually get to control the car. And then it logs the track record of the network and sees how would it have performed if it was driving. How safe is it if it were to actually act on these things? And once they've gotten satisfied with how well it's doing, then they could actually flip the bit and actually let it make the decisions. So what about malicious attacks? What kind of attacks exist, and how do we protect against these attacks? Well, one of the most common ones is a thing called adversarial examples. It's applying small but intentionally worst-case perturbations to examples from the data set such that the perturbed input results in the model outputting an incorrect answer with high confidence. It's a little complicated, but what that means is that it grabs these details and images, especially when it's doing image-based things, and it grabs sort of things that, to us, aren't what define a cat being a cat, or it doesn't define an apple being an apple, but it allows the model to predict what a cat is and an apple is without really, like it can pull these things out and actually predict things. And in 2019, this was described as particularly worrisome. So, and this research started in about 2014. So after about 5 years, we're still describing it as worrisome. Let's look at an example. On the left, we have a panda. And on the right, this was fed to a state-of-the-art classifier. And with 99.3% confidence, it said this was a gibbon. So it's these kinds of attacks that can, to us, it looks like the same image, but to an artificial intelligence neural network classifier, this is something completely different for it. So like I said, they're from these presence of non-robust features. So it has these small indicators that the neural networks latch onto, but to us, we don't see those. And so the networks train on these non-robust features, and if we alter them Just slightly. To us, it looks the same, but to the networks, it's something completely different. So what can be done? Well, we can train agents using an adversarial loss function that can discern between robust and non-robust features, so we can actually test in the training whether or not it's training off of these robust or non-robust features. Or we can create a data set that has all the non-robust features pulled out of it. And so the graph on the right shows that with both of these solutions, you have slightly worse accuracy overall, but it has a way better result when you're dealing with these adversary examples. Let's talk about some of the ethical problems. So the questions a lot of the time is, do agents have to be proven, and when is it proven enough? So I personally would think that it would be very unethical if somebody were to train a model on a self-driving car and without having proven it to themselves, just released it and let people drive in it without knowing whether or not this model works or not. But at the same time, I don't think it has to be nearly proven enough if you're just trying to run a neural network on, is this image a hot dog or not? So the ethical problem is how much do we have to prove these systems to ourselves? And a lot of this is based on the specific application and how much power a machine learning, the output of a machine learning models is given. So in conclusion, machine learning is not as provable natively as compared to something like classical AI, but there are ways to becoming provable. That's my sources. Any questions?
Let me just pan it out.
So, I mean, kind of going back to the self-driving and the example, you talked about efficiency. So in those two cases, do we mostly care about false negative or false positive?
It ends up becoming actually both because and to different degrees, because one of them causes an accident a lot of the time, but then a lot of the other time it causes the car to slam on its brakes when like nothing's going on around. So it's actually like both that you really have to care about. Thank you.
All right, my name is Christopher Wright, and today I'll be talking about addiction and gambling within gaming. We all know gaming is a joyful activity, but it can have some serious consequences. You can use gaming to implement complex concepts for like children, teaching children and such. Enjoyment. We're all computer science majors. I'm sure the majority of us own consoles or gaming computers, and we utilize those in our free time. But it can lead to lack of socialization in the real world. It can negatively affect eyesight and posture and your mental well-being. Here we have somebody who's getting enraged over a video game. Last year, June 2018-ish, there was a shooting at a Madden tournament. And the guy shut up the tournament because he didn't win. And I'm using this as an example of temperament. Temperament in gaming, gaming can cause a shift in temperament, negative, which is, I'd say, is the result of the young man shooting up that tournament. You can see it in children, you can see it here. Gaming disorder is a legit disorder, and it's classified in the International Classifications of Diseases as of last year. And that's a pattern of persistent or recurring gaming behavior, which may be online or offline, manifested by impaired control over gaming, increasing priority given to gaming to the extent that gaming takes precedence over other life interests. And I have a few examples of that later on. Some assumptions going into this: video game disorder isn't a real thing. There are bigger problems in society, such as global warming, such. So it's not a surprise that this isn't top tier in our problems. It isn't serious, which it may be and it can be. Only children and teens can get addicted to video games, which is far from the truth. You can't get addicted to mobile games, and features such as loot boxes are not a legit form of gambling. I'll get to that. The history of addiction and gambling within gaming. As of 2009, 8.5% of children who played video games had symptoms and were capable of being considered addicted. The World Health Organization classified it as a disease last year. So it's a new occurrence, not a new occurrence, but being accepted as such. Back in 1999, Douglas Gentile started research to prove that it wasn't a real disorder or disease. He found the opposite, and he continues to do research on the subject. The research on gaming addiction dates back to the 80s. I believe it was a case in a high school for Space Invaders, where children wouldn't go to sleep and such. And it was affecting their performance in school, which is another consequence of gaming. And a US senator proposed a bill that would put a ban on loot boxes and microtransactions within games. Does anybody know what a loot box is? Would you like to explain it? You like to talk.
So a loot box is just almost like a slot machine where you roll and you get a randomized item out of it. And so these loot boxes give you in-game items. They have different rarity levels. So there's generally a bunch of common ones that are less appreciated, and then this really rare item. And so you can generally for $2.50 buy a loot box that gives you a random item in the game.
And that brings about an ethical problem. Loot boxes are implemented within games that children play, and that can lead to gambling addiction and gaming addiction, and it works off the principle of scarcity. So you don't know what you'll get, but you're actually trading in real money for in-game currency to get an item that you're not guaranteed, which by definition is gambling. Here are a few symptoms of addiction. And I'll be honest, I've had at least 2 of these. I'm sure somebody else has in this room. Preoccupation with video games, withdrawal symptoms, tolerance, unsuccessful attempts to control the participation in video games, loss of interest in previous hobbies, continued excessive use, deception of family members or others, and use of video games to escape or relieve a negative mood. I for sure have had the last one, but loss of interest in previous hobbies, excessive use, and deception of members of your family and such are very common. And I'll tell you a quick story. It's not really a story, but I have a friend, we'll call him Friend, and we play a game together, and he has to work about 8 p.m. every day. So once he get home from class, normally he would shower and go to work, but we were playing the game. Apparently he smelled, so he preferred to play the game than shower. So he went to work smelly. Back to loot boxes. My problem with this is children are being targeted. It creates an unfair advantage according to gamers. Simply a game of chance which can lead to addiction. Companies continue to defend and profit off of them. And once again, there was a bill proposed to end microtransactions. It's a different country, but just as the senator wanted to end microtransactions and loot boxes here, they did it. I think it was Belgium. Belgium stopped the implementation of loot boxes. And a report from the gamers, they said even though they took them out, they were still happy with the decision afterwards. And I have a few quotes from addicts. I pulled this from the Madden subreddit. EA has 3 different games in which they incorporate microtransactions and loot boxes. And let's see, a decent example. When I skipped the weight room to be one of the first to get that sweet, sweet house rules Gronkowski. Gronkowski is a tight end, well, he was a tight end. And within the game, he was a limited time card. So this dude skipped physical well-being, which I assume is the norm, to get a limited time card, back to the principle of scarcity. So it affected another aspect of his life. And I would like to go into the DDA, dynamic difficulty adjustments. So anybody know what that is?
Gameplay increases the difficulty based on how well you play.
And that's normally for single player games where the computer will adjust to give you a challenge. So in multiplayer games in which there's a paid system, and they also call like microtransactions pay to win. So let's say you're playing somebody else's team and you're like on a losing streak, and they have a paid team, they bought all their cards and such. The DDA, if the developers implement that, you might be on the verge of quitting because you're on a losing streak, just getting rid of the game. They will change the attributes of that person's team, which is better than yours, so you can win, keeping you hooked onto the game, or to make it to where your only option is to pay for in-game content just to compete, which I'm not a fan of, and it's pay to win once again. Anything you can play a game on. Yeah. Mobile cell phones. Have you ever played like Farmville on Facebook? Oh, all right. So like some games, like mobile games, you can play, it's free to play. That's how they get you in, but there can be like a cooldown time in which you have to pay for in-game currency. So you play this like amount of hours, then you have to stop because it's like a paywall essentially, and you buy in-game currency so you can keep playing when it's supposed to be a free-to-play game. As a computer science major, my concentration is in HCI, so I like to understand the relationship between humans and the interaction they have with technology. And in this case, I want to understand why users find the need to play these games and remain hooked. And I also like to understand the way developers implement a system which essentially controls users and keeps them hooked, such as implementing the DDA in order to keep them playing the game. In conclusion, gaming can come with some serious consequences, and in the case of children, they should remove loot boxes and microtransactions. There have been examples of children taking their parents' credit cards and spending tons of cash on microtransactions. And there are also mental and physical consequences to gaming. Thank you for your time.
Good evening, guys. My name is Nabeel Ali. Today I'm discussing human-computer interaction. I'm sure everyone has had some interaction with any type of technology in their daily lives. All right, so as I discussed, an overview and in-depth analysis of HCI, I want you guys to have these questions in mind. How will ethics, privacy, and security differ with a more technology-augmented environment, as well as how will it affect social organizations as the role of people in, with technology and how technology will affect us, as well as the constant daily interactions with technology, how will that differ from now into the future. So I say that the type of problem there is, it will be early manifestation of a new generic problem. What I mean by that is, say we're introducing these new technologies today, and we're just learning about these new problems, for example, such as Tesla.
and they had these self-driven cars, problems that might occur as the car says it's turning right, it'll turn left. As you know, in the future, this might be like a normal problem. Hey man, my car's turned left, that's what's happening. So that might turn into a new generic problem. But currently, this technology is just really being introduced and being more utilized, as you can see, as Tesla has introduced that new big truck that some of you guys have seen or not. So some assumptions with HCI usually is they want some sort of behavioral change. They want some action is the goal. When in fact some people don't really want to have a behavior change. They more or less see how they are relative to somebody else in society, as well as people don't want to use, a lot of HCI technology are personal informatic tools such as Fitbit, Apple Watch, anything can pretty much uses your personal data. Some people find that burdensome, so that might not be a good thing to do. And as well as more data is better is an assumption, which sometimes can be over complex. Some people might be annoyed by that or confused as to using these technologies as they collect all this data, and normally shows too much data at once. So that might be overwhelming. Next is a point of view as a community computer science major, current senior. I'm also doing concentration in HCI. I say that it provides a great insight how we can make technology more properly accessible to people across the world, and how we make future innovations to come make it more accessible and easy. As well as I can provide a good amount of data on how humans currently use technology. We can try to find insights of what we can do for the future and compare how we use it now and how we can do it in the future. As well as I can find current flaws and improve that, as well as use that current improvement on other technologies to come. So history of HCI, it started around the 1980s originally. At that time, there wasn't many technology. It was more desktops, those big computers that not many people had, mostly researchers and scientists. And then mostly they created mental models. Mental models are basically a visual picture of human thought processes of how to use technologies. So that was mostly around the 1980s. Then it moved on to collaboration, communication. Technology became more involved. More doing emailing, messaging, and you're collaborating, like using Google Docs. That's how it kind of pertained to. And now, as mid-2000s, 2010s, even now, it's a lot of technologies based on self-expression and social change. Using these technologies to better yourself as well as express who you are. And I believe that's the current behavior of kind of what HCI is going on with in the current time. So the science of HCI, it's not, I believe it's pretty common to understand. It's basically studying how we pertain to use technology, how our thought process, what we see first using something, what we draw attention to, the colors that we like the most, the way a certain thing is laid out. We try to find ways that will be easier for us to use. For example, go on the website. Where would we like for like the sign-in button to be on the certain website? Which side would be easier? So research also includes psychologists and scientists drawing on their own experiences of using technology and understanding how humans can learn and solve different situations when they use different technologies and how to make that problem easier for them. Also, as another science is creating a test, creating a hypothesis and doing usability studies, kind of see how that user or a person will react to that specific technology that is being tested. So ethics, I believe ethics is a really important concept of HCI because it has a lot of involvement with other people. So you always want to keep a degree of professionalism because familiarity between research and participants can develop naturally, having that connection with somebody over time, because usually with HCI, these testings, they take a while. Now might be more than 1-2 sessions to kind of understand the behavior of the person with the technology, your website, or anything that you're testing, as well as tools and methods for HCI researchers. So with HCI becoming more and more common, you want these researchers to have awareness of ethics, kind of have, been done through some training to understand, what's the right way in doing these testings, right way in communicating with that person. You want to know that this person cares about who you are as well, not just you're just a test subject or something. And making sure to disclose any information, providing a notice like, hey, you're going to use this technology, it might have this risk or this harm to you, and it's up to you whether or not you like to participate in this testing or this usability study. So themes that are common with ACIs, so as ACI technology comes more into our lives, we tend to rely on things for use technology for our daily tasks. As well, another theme is that as we interact with these technologies, a lot of us, even as computer students, we think of new ideas, new ways from interacting with computers, Apple Watches, or gaming, or anything in general. There's always new ideas emerging from us, as well as anybody else in their job field or their daily lives. Conclusion, I think that ACI is an important topic because as the number of people that have accessibility to computers and technology increases, I believe ACI will become an even better, important topic as the future to come. Currently, not just because technology is spreading more wide, eventually I think more people will have access to internet, computers, and other technology that some first world countries may have that other countries don't yet. And I think ACI provides a great insight on what can come for us for the future, what changes can be made into current technology that we interact with. Also, that is controlled experiments, usability studies provide a great direction for how we can go about for future technology in the future. Significance of the conclusion is that the computers and technology have a direct impact on our lives. So doing these testings with ACI will kind of be important for us to do and discuss this in the upcoming years. And as we improve these technologies, we'll kind of provide insight how we can take society and better people's lives in a way that it'll be positive impact. And collecting data through these studies will provide a great insight on what ways we can improve current technology, and also as well creating new designs, interfaces, anything that we use now and make it even better. These are my sources. Thank you.
We're almost done. Don't worry about it. So today I'm going to talk to you all about the hyperconnectivity of the Internet of Things, and my name is Marwa Alkqatari. So, since we went over the Internet of Things with Abel today, some stuff will be a little familiar, like introducing some basic terminology about the Internet of Things. So, for a start, what is the Internet of Things? The Internet of Things is some electronic devices that are connected to the internet and share data through collecting those data from the sensors that they have. What's IIoT? It's the Industrial Internet of Things, which is anything connected to the industry. So factories, production plants, sensor networks, and so on. IoE is the Internet of Everything. Cloud computing is basically using someone else's computer that's public in the cloud, so anyone can have access to it. Big data is trillions of connected Internet of Things devices, and global network is basically any communication network that spans the entire Earth. So, type of problem, I chose that it's a descriptive problem because it's something to analyze instead of to solve. Assumptions. Any physical object can be implemented with some sort of technology to make a smart object. And two, the convergence of multiple technologies, real-time analytics, machine learning, commodity sensors, and embedded systems can evolve the Internet of Things. My point of view is of a computer science student studying at UNCC. The history, so some of it Abel mentioned, but I'm gonna talk about some history that wasn't mentioned. So Nikola Tesla predicted the potential of Internet of Things, saying When wireless is perfectly applied, the whole Earth will be converted to a huge brain. And we're almost there. In 1982, there was a Coke vending machine invented at Carnegie Mellon University that used the internet to vend some items. And in 1989, John Romkey created the first internet toaster. So you can literally turn it on and off using the internet. 1999, Mark Weiser, I don't know how to say his name, I think it's Weiser or Weiser, invented a water fountain outside of his office that mimicked the price trends in the stock market. And in the 2000s, LG announced the internet refrigerator, which later became a huge meme. In 2008, the Internet of Things was one of the 6 disruptive civil tech impacts that was predicted to impact the US interests in 2025. And right now, in 2019, we have smart door locks, Bluetooth trackers, smart kitchens, self-driving cars, and much more. So it literally consumed the world that we live in. All right, some science about it. So I have some analytics from the NCTA about the growth of the Internet of Things and the number of devices related to the years that we have. And we see that in 2014 to 2015, there's a big jump in the number of connected devices, and it rocketed to 5 billion connected devices. And it's predicted that in 2020, we'll have 50 billion connected devices. So in retrospect, right now we have 7.3 billion people, so we'll have a lot of connected devices, even more than the number of people that we have right now in the world. And the senior producer of CNET said that the emergence of the Internet of Things is the beginning of the 4th industrial revolution. So what you need to deliver the Internet of Things, you just need a high-speed data network, a secure network, fast accessible Wi-Fi, and integrated ISP support. Ethics. So the IEEE said to treat fairly all persons regardless of such factors as race, religion, gender, disability, age, or national origin in 2012, although there's a big discrimination against people who do not have access to the internet. So this could lower the cost of the socioeconomical families more and decrease inefficiencies for higher families in retrospect. And 2, Internet of Things could impede on privacy by collecting the information of people and their habits. Companies will have access to the tools to infringe upon customers. So when companies have readily available information to them that could increase their revenue, they're gonna most probably infringe on people's privacy to do that, just like Google or Facebook. Themes, I chose impacts of IoT on our society, which include the dangers of Internet of Things on our privacy. So in conclusion, there is an expansion of Internet of Things devices that will allow a hyper-interconnected world, and we will have challenges since Internet of Things devices allow generated information as means for companies to enhance their revenue. Significance of conclusion, Gartner predicts that 95% of new electronic products will contain the IoT technology by 2020. So everything that can be connected will be connected. And this is significant to us as educators and computer professionals because we have the ethical responsibility to do something about people's experience with IoT devices. So knowing that, we need to find ways to improve on privacy and safety for all users and enhance their experience. These are my sources, and thank you so much for listening. Do you have any question? What's up?
We live in a global economy. Our elections were hacked last year. There's heightened the sensitivity in the policy universe to the degree of openness that our internet and our systems have. And part of that conversation was protection of national security, not just for the United States, but what all the nations in the world, especially the big players, started thinking about that, wanting less and less integrated internets. So China starts to establish its own internet, Russia starts to establish their own internet. So there's a whole policy discussion about how you design an internet when your focus is national security. I pray you guys get interested in that because you're quite amazing, okay? And that universe needs thinkers in that sense. So we have an internet of things. Can you imagine it? And if not, please start thinking, start imagining an internet of internets. Okay? Because that's where it's going. And it's going, and then the dynamics which shape its outcome are becoming global, not national, worrying about people buying products and blah, 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 blah. No, it's, I'm going to control your water and sewer system, I'm going to turn off all your radios, I'm going to interfere with your society. I just wanted to raise that.
Yeah, I agree, especially because now computer science is one of the big majors that everyone is getting into because that's our future. And with that, I feel like it's important that we have this conversation and get into the ethics of using computers to affect our world. All right. Thank you so much for listening.
Hello, my name is Tom Stewart. I'm a computer science undergraduate student at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. I'm very happy to be here. I hope to give you guys a good speech today. My topic that I will be talking about today will be the importance of computational complexity in business. All right. What is computational complexity? Computational complexity theory is a subfield of theoretical computer science. The primary goal is to classify and compare the practical difficulty of solving problems about finite combinatorial objects. That's not very interesting. So we're going to jump over quite a bit of the math in this, and I'm going to be arguing why it has important uses in business, even in non-technical areas of business modeling. All right. This is the very formal definition, roughly along the lines of what I just said. Again, it's not particularly useful unless you are someone that is already studying the field. So I'm going to abstract a little bit away from this, as I mentioned previously. Now, the basics. We're forgoing the math. It goes over my head, and I'm studying it. So, the spirit of computational complexity is best shown through an example. Billy has a server. He is a business owner, and his server does some function for that business. Now, Billy's server usually has a normal load. So that normal load could be creating resources for 100 to 1,000 users. That could be what its normal stress. Now, something could happen, and it could be a celebrity retweeting a link, or it could be a cyber attack, or it could just be normal business growth. But all of a sudden, there is a huge influx of traffic into his server. Now, Billy knows that his server works between 100 and 1,000 people. But as soon as it jumps up to 100,000 people, it doesn't scale so well. Now, Billy's surprised at this because he usually, under a normal load, his server only uses about 100th of its capacity. But it doesn't scale linearly like he would expect. The difficulty the server is put under between 1,000 people and 100,000 people does not go up by just a factor of 100. Now, this causes a crash because he doesn't have enough resources. And we've seen this in a practical scenario several times. The Veterans Affairs website went down in 2017 for similar reasons. A multitude of retail websites went down on Cyber Monday because people want deals. And the biggest example that always comes to my mind when I think of this is the Obamacare website. If you remember, the day that it launched, only 5 people managed to register out of the entire nation. Not very good. not very good. All right. So back to our example. What happened with Billy's server? The server couldn't handle a load. We can see that. The visitors could not be processed because each user that is processed was not taking a reasonable amount of time. Now, to understand this, we need to see what processes the server was put through to test it under a load. Now, the main sort of testing that is done is called stress testing. You simulate a load on the server, and you see if it crashes. That's the basis, but it only gives a snapshot of the performance of the server under a certain load. So you only know how it performs with 100 people on it if you test for 100 people. Now, this can become a little bit of an issue because you don't know how it grows as the number of people accessing your server grows. So computational complexity gives a model to show how the difficulty of a problem or a task increases as the size of the task or problem grows. Do you guys have any questions about that? I don't know. It was the first name that came into my head. So it's Billy or Bob. That's what it defines, actually. It describes the difficulty of the problem or task as a function of the input size. So obviously, if something scales linearly, so it's some sort of coefficient in the value of the input size, it's pretty good. That's considered a good runtime. But if it's function like 2 to the power of the input size, it does not scale very well because it doubles every time the size of the problem increases. Now, I'm going to forego that for the most part. That is sort of getting into the math, but if you have any questions pertaining to that, please bring it up. All good? Okay. Again, it's talking of the concept that it does not scale linearly with the size of the problem. Now, it doesn't always have to deal with the time it takes to complete a task. It can be the amount of resources, specifically talking about the memory on a computer, or later on as we get into business examples, things like the amount of electricity you use in a building, or the number of trucks you need for a fleet, based on some value. Now, this is really mathy, but the thing that you need to remember out of it is that this is the size of the problem growing, and this is the time that it takes, or the number of resources that it takes to complete that problem. And most problems, under certain conditions that I'll bring up later, can be classified into one of these classes. So things like O of 1 means that the problem does not get harder as the size of the problem increases. For example, if you have for the jelly bean example from right there, from his example, if the problem is to find out the color of the very first jelly bean, it doesn't matter how many jelly beans there are in the line. It's always going to be the same amount of time because you just look at the first jelly bean. So that would be something like this, and this is considered a very good runtime. Others, like O of n, which means that it grows in terms of the size of the problem to the size of the problem. That's not very good, and that's where you start to run into things like the Obamacare website crashing. All right, why does it matter? Some of you might be thinking, why do I care? IT is going to deal with it. And that's mostly because I have presented just technical examples so far. And most of the applications of computational complexity that you will find nowadays are in terms of algorithms and computation and things that are generally removed from business practices. So I'll give you 2 reasons, and the second one is a lead-on from the first one, why you should consider computational complexity within a business setting. All right. Reason 1, it applies to non-technical areas. As I alluded to before with the trucks or the amount of power into a building, I have 3 examples that are not technical, at least in a computation sense, but can be used with computational complexity. The first one, the number of trucks to be produced in a day at a factory as a function of the number of employees needed to meet that production. So if you have a goal of producing 100 trucks in a day at a truck factory, you need a certain number of people. Now, to produce 101 trucks a day, I doubt you're going to need 1 more person. So understanding how that number grows can give you an idea, not just of how many people you need right now to meet a certain need, but as your business grows, you can get an idea of the resources you're going to need in the future. The next example, cost of electricity needed for an office as a function of the number of employees in the office. Now, this may not grow. If you have an office of a certain size, you may pay a flat electricity fee. As you increase the number of people in the office, you may not see growth. And computational complexity gives an excellent way to communicate that to other areas of your business model. My third example, the number of trucks needed for delivery as a function of the area that the delivery services and the number of packages. So you have 2 variables that you are considering. You have the area and the number of packages. And you have some sort of function that you can communicate the number of trucks needed for that task. So those are 3 different examples that are not technical in nature, that can be used to concisely and expressively define problems in your business model. So how do I apply it to my own business models? Okay, well, I've given 3 examples, but if you have a problem, how do you write it in a way similar to the examples that I gave? So there are 2 conditions that must be met. The problem must be quantifiable. That means it can be evaluated to some number that can be used to model the output of the question. So in this case, it would be the number of employees would be quantifiable. That is a quantification of your business. The number of employees is still it in the watts of electricity needed per day. And finally, the area of the delivery in square miles and the number of packages is the quantification of the problem. And finally, the problem must be objective. This is pretty straightforward. It must have an answer. It can't be something along the lines of, is this good art? Or what is the meaning of life? Computational complexity can't help you with that. Okay. Generality. The power of computational complexity falls that it is not restricted to a certain domain in your business modeling. It's general. So while there's more precise models for certain areas, what comes to mind would be the money side of business. For areas where this does not work, computational complexity can fill in the gaps and give you a more accurate model rather than winging it and just guessing. All right. Reason 2 is communication. I don't feel much of a justification to tell you why clear communication within a business is important. Now, of course, being very explicit in problems and being concise are 2 things that are important in that area. Helps remove ambiguity from communication between parties. These are my sources. They are very small. In conclusion, I'm making an argument to why you should consider computational complexity as a tool to help model your business. Thank you. Are there any questions? Questions? Cool. Thank you.
And let's just take a little break from computers and technology and talk about something that really hits home. And as I like to call, the obesity epidemic in America, or a silent killer. So my name is Michelle Thomas, and this is what I'll be presenting on. So the main issues that we're going to focus on today is how over the past 20 years, to put it bluntly, America has just gotten fat. We eat, and we eat, and we eat, and we gain weight. And so for now, it's just creating so many problems, such as how serious is this crisis? How is it going to affect us in the future? At what cost is this coming out of our pockets? And how is social media really attacking this body image that we have and how much weight we're gaining? So this point of view, I'm a UNCC student majoring in human-computer interaction, and I'm minoring in Chinese, but I also have a passion for health. So childhood obesity is starting to claim America's population. For example, there are so many schools that are coming up that are focused in STEM studies, which are science and mathematics based. And they're giving less attention to some of the sports that we have. And school boards are just thinking, you know what, let's just focus on the sciences, not on any physical activity. They're not realizing that physical activity can help students study more and study better and give them a break from just constantly looking at equations or problems and that such. So this has led some students to the mindset that we don't need physical activity. There's no reason that I need to go out and spend 30 minutes a day on a walk. They also think, like, in my future career, I'm gonna be a computer scientist. It's a sedentary lifestyle. Why do I need to go outside and take a walk? Not realizing that, you know, sometimes if you are looking at a problem and you find that it's way too difficult, taking a walk about 10 or 15 minutes outside helps clear your mind, and returning to that problem, you'll be able to solve it more efficiently and get a different mindset on it. And so there's some added weight has like a severe effect on not only your mind, but on your body too. So these are a handful of negative effects such as heart disease, diabetes, stroke, asthma, and these are just a small amount of these things. And it doesn't just affect physically, but also mentally too. People who were once healthy and then become obese find that they're not able to enjoy the activities that they used to enjoy because they don't simply have the energy for it. And family members who have to deal with the people who have obesity don't know how to help them in a sense. You can only do so much by saying, let's go out on a walk or let's eat healthy, but kids nowadays find that sometimes they have to put their life on hold for their parents to help them with this issue. And so that's not only crushing the parent's future, but it's also crushing that child's future. So in a sense, obesity is not just dealing with oneself and oneself's issue, but it's affecting your family and your friends. So it's also hurting America's wallet. Most of the people with the lack of productivity, they sometimes have to stop working. And because of that, they're not only slowing down America's economy, they're also leaning on the government more for support. Over $150 billion in annual healthcare related stuff to obesity, where they have to do surgeries, get medicine, or just go to the doctor, which is around 21% of the annual medical spending is from the epidemic itself. So here's a diagram showing from 1985 how we used to be not obese, but then if you look in 2014, most of America is suffering from a large increase of obesity-related issues. So how does social media really affect children? So let's look at YouTube, for example. We all like it. We all like using it as an entertainment, a source to escape, or just for information. But there's a lot of people who are picking up on this culture called mukbanging, and you might be wondering, what is a mukbang? Mukbang is a cultural thing that's from Japan where people sit down with a ton of food and they just eat it and eat it and eat it, and it's thousands and thousands of calories, and they're just talking. And it gives children who want to find an escape, like someone to eat with, and they think, if they're doing it, then I can do it, and this is fun. And YouTube pays for these things. They think, oh, since it's nothing explicit, they're just simply talking, it's fine and it's safe for kids to do, not realizing that you're putting this mentality of gorging food is okay. And then you have Instagram models and Instagram stars. I know all of you guys have seen these Instagrammers who get sponsored by Takis or McDonald's, and they're showing their slim body, but they're like, I love eating McDonald's. And these kids are looking at it like, if they're eating McDonald's, I can eat McDonald's often too, and still maintain that figure, not realizing that it's the companies that are feeding into this. So who is harmed? Children, adults, America's economy. And who benefits? Fast food corporations, plus-size clothing companies, and social media influencers. Plus-size clothing companies such as Fenty. We all know and love Rihanna. However, it's great that she's saying, love your image, love your body, and we all want to do that. However, if you are leading an unhealthy lifestyle, is that truly loving your body? It's more so hurting yourself. So she is using this whole idea of body image and body self-care to promote her own clothing line. Yes?
I wonder, do you think if people knew how much money they could save by just eating what they needed, then that would help with obesity? Because I know I don't have a whole lot of money, but whatever money I do have, most of it goes to food already.
So some places have food deserts. So the only thing that they can go to is a gas station to pick up their cheap gallon of milk. If you look at Whole Foods, a lot of it is like really pricey, and it's also in these places where there's a lot of socioeconomic, outpour, and like there's a lot of people there, and people want to invest in these places. So yes, money is also an issue, but also just locality of where they're living at also affects it strongly. So in conclusion, the obesity epidemic has officially taken over America, and it can be spread globally and will continue to spread globally. And it's going to be one of the leading causes of death in the world unless we change it. So I think if we take preventative steps, such as starting children in health programs, teaching them nutrition, physical activity can help you reach goals in your career, and having companies more accountable for their employees' health. I know as Duke Energy is doing these things where if you lose a certain amount of weight, you get an incentive or your team gains something. And overall, understanding the severity and effects of obesity can change someone's mindset, especially if you have a family member and you know what they're going through. It puts in perspective what could happen to yourself if you let yourself go like that. So here are my sources, and thank you. Any questions, comments? Yes.
Have you heard of any solutions to double counting problem you were talking about?
The what? There are some solutions where some companies and some programs are going to local schools and educating students about food deserts and showing them ways that even if you only have this local gas station, what can you do to make healthier and smarter choice instead of gravitating towards the cookies or like the canned preheated meals. Yeah, so there's small things like that, but overall it's still a serious problem in America how there isn't that option for people to go out and get that healthier choice. Thank you.
I'm talking about computer vision and the authenticity of video. So we'll just start off with a quick outline of what we're doing. I'm going to start off talking about the history and how these two technologies developed, and then we're going to step into some new developments in deepfakes and artificial images. And we're going to talk about how these systems should and should not be used in a public setting, and then I'll open it up for sort of an ethical discussion amongst the people still around. So my point of view on this sort of topic is as a senior computer science student at UNC Charlotte, mainly my focus has been high performance and distributed computing. And then hopefully after I graduate here in about 2 weeks, if I can get funding, I'll continue this sort of research with my PhD program. That's still up in the air, but that is my intention. So let's jump into history real fast. Starting in 1959, these two gentlemen here, David Hubble and Torsten Wiesel, what they did is they took a cat and they stuck some neurons or some electrodes into the brain of this cat, And they showed the cat a bunch of different images on a slide projector. And they sat here doing this for about 2 months, getting no results. And they realized eventually one day, all they were doing is looking at the results while the cat was looking at the image already placed in the scanner. One day, they looked at the scanner while they were moving a slide out of the frame, and the edge of the frame causing a line on the projection is the only thing that actually triggered any sort of response from the cat. What they learned from this is that basic eye systems and vision systems, the first thing that they're going to notice is any movement and any break in a line. They're not going to really detect images at that low of a level. Then the next development we had in the field is in 1959, Russell Kirsch developed a technology that took this image of his infant son, and it is at 176 square pixels. It's incredibly low resolution, but you can still sort of see that it is his infant son. This image is now in the Portland Art Museum. If you want to look at that, that's an option. Then in 1963, an algorithm was written by Lawrence Roberts. This is sort of what it does. It'll take the input of an image, it'll break that down into a line diagram, and then take it down to a pixelated feature points where you have a 3D image of all of the locations along those lines. Next thing we have is in 1982. Basically, this is just another paper that they wrote, and it sort of fleshes out these algorithms and updated them to modern computing standards. Around 1999, we had a switchover, and instead of constructing a model of the images we're trying to understand, we decided to just see the image and infer what we can from the point of view we already have. And so basically what this is you'll see, it sees an orange, it tells you it's an orange. It sees a banana, that's a banana. It's basically just simple object recognition within your images. And that is where we are today. This is basically the technology we use today. In 2010, of one of the largest data sets available became available. It's over 1 million images with over 1,000 different classes or an object. Like an orange would be a class, the banana is a class, things like this. And the human standard error rate for like looking at an image and understanding what it is about 5%. Today, it's actually lower than this 2.3. This is from 2017. Last night, I checked, and it was around 0.06. So this is a very accurate data set. Now let's get into the history of facial recognition. In 1960, the first system for facial recognition came out. This was not computerized. This was a man with a RAND tablet, and he manually inputted all of the measurements of your face. And then he has a database that he can put in a photograph, and it will spit out what member of this database that photograph most likely resembles based on the inputs from that tablet. 1970 was sort of an expansion upon this same method. They added a few more identifying markers, made it a little bit more accurate. In 1998, we have this linear algebra-based implementation. They call it the eigenface model. Basically, all that it does is take these original implementations, added a lot more features, over 100, and automated the process. 1991, we have an expansion of eigenface, and they parallelized it and expanded it to high-performance computing situations. And then in 1993, we had DARPA found this NIST Foundation, which sort of pushes for, well, they didn't found that organization, I'm sorry, they partnered with that organization to begin pushing for the adoption of facial recognition technologies within the commercial space. In 2002, we had our first major debut of a facial recognition system on the public, and it was a massive failure. They recognized about 5 or 6 of the football players playing in the Super Bowl as criminals, and they recognized 0 of the actual criminals that they knew were in attendance. So in 2009, we have the first system that's taken over by the police, Pinellas County. I believe that's in California somewhere, but I'm not sure. They rolled out a facial recognition database that is tied into your DMV records. So say you get pulled over, that body cam that they have is immediately tied into your facial recognition, immediately tied into your DMV data as soon as that camera sees you. 2010, Facebook got in some trouble they got in some trouble later. They rolled out a feature for Facebook can automatically understand which of your friends are in a photo. That's how the tagging feature works. It'll recommend people for you to tag based on this system. 2011, Panama rolled out a system in the Tucumán airport. This city has a pretty bad situation with drug trafficking and human trafficking, so they wanted to try and get a tighter view on what was going on inside this airport. Yeah.
In states where you need dual consent of the reporter and the reportee to report somebody, is that legal? Or like
basically, any footage that you can get on a CCTV is perfectly legal in facial recognition system. The facial recognition isn't really going to come into play in terms of whether or not the video is admissible. Where the video comes from is what we're going to be making the decision on, and therefore, and that's not really tied to the technology. It's just going to be where you are and what the situation is. It could be different for any situation. There's not really a great way to answer that question, I'm sorry. Yes?
In the situation that you described where it was a failure and I think you said 6 of the football players were recognized as criminals?
Yes.
Were those football players black?
I believe so, but I don't know the specifics. The article I just read gave me the numbers, but I have there's been a few like social media postings. That's the vibe that I got, but I haven't actually seen a list of the names, so I can't tell you definitively on that. But I will note, facial recognition systems do perform a lot more effectively on paler skin because you can get the angles a lot more easily. Just by the nature of the way cameras work, they pick up lighter features a lot more effectively. And shadows and things like this become a bigger issue. So 2011, the Osama bin Laden, they used the facial recognition system to verify that it was in fact Osama bin Laden. Later in 2014, the Justice Department rolled out a system very similar to the one that Sheriff's Department system rolled out earlier back in 2009. But this tied in with the FBI, DOJ, DAA. Basically, every federal organization uses this system now. And it basically ties in almost every known criminal back into a regulated system that all of these organizations can access whenever they need to. Later on in 2017, we have the iPhone X roll out the first commercial use of facial recognition as a security implement. So you can use your face to unlock your phone. And there have been all kinds of issues around this. It just doesn't work. That's the too long didn't read version is it doesn't work. It's not ready. In 2017, Face First released a system that they call it Watch List as a Service. And it's essentially the same thing as this, but public companies can use it. Say Belk or Kohl's, one of these large, Walmart, one of these large stores that wants to surveil their area and make sure that no known shoplifters or known assault criminals, things like this, are coming into their stores and causing an issue. Their camera systems can recognize those people and flag them, and that way your staff could know they need to keep maybe an extra eye out while that person's walking around the store. So now let's get into deepfakes, which is the biggest problem we're going to have. I'm going to show this short video, and it will sort of explain this better than I would be able to.
Which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the Sunday place, or how about this, simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele. This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from you.
The rest of the video is basically just what I would be saying now. But what you saw there was basically Obama's face superimposed over Jordan Peele impersonating Barack Obama in his best impersonation voice. And some of you may have been tricked at the very beginning. You may have thought that was actually Barack Obama, and that's a common mistake. And that's one of the biggest threats that comes up with this new deepfake technology. And this is what it is. It's, well, let me talk about this. This is a project done by NVIDIA, which is one of the largest computing companies in this country. They used artificial intelligence, something called GANs, or Generative Adversarial Networks. What they do is they take two AIs, or artificial intelligence. One creates an image based on some input, and the other decides whether or not that input is up to par, whether or not it looks enough like the desired output to be accepted. And they compete with one another until they come to a conclusion that they decide it's acceptable. And so you can see this is the input that they used, and then these are all images that were created by an AI to simulate these different species of animals with that input image there that you see on the side. Here's a few more examples. The bottom is the output image that they came up with using this middle input, and then the top is what they were trying to achieve. And you can see they're not perfect, but they're pretty convincing. You would think that this is a real animal most of the time. Now, deepfake detection. How do we discern whether or not a deepfake is a deepfake? The one that you saw with Barack Obama was used they created that using a system very similar to how modern animation works. Like you see a guy will wear like a green suit with a lot of little balls all over it, and that allows them to track his body movements. They use something very similar to that. Now we have object recognition, like I talked about earlier. They don't need those ball suits. They can just track your body in a video. And they use that technology to create a mesh of the person you want to impersonate's body and to superimpose it over top of your own. Or they can use, like we showed with that other image, what they will do, those generative artificial networks, they will generate, they'll generate a very high precision image of my ear, and then my chin, and then my eye, and then my nose, and then they'll mesh all of these together and make a full image of me. And the best way that we can use to detect these deepfakes is by looking for artifacts that are created when meshing those images back together, because it's never going to be perfectly, it's never going to be exact. And then especially when it's a video and not just an image, it's incredibly easy, because they're not going to capture eye movements. They're not going to capture the reflection of someone walking past in your eyes. Most of the time, blinking is going to be only, they'll have your eye closed for a few frames and your eye open for a few frames, but that intermittent movement they won't capture, so you can detect that. Little things like this, little details, is how we're using artificial intelligence and high specificity facial recognition models allow us to detect these deepfakes, not in real time, but close to real time. Now, some of the arguments against or for the use of these computer vision systems on the public. Like you guys have stated earlier, it does pose a lot of public safety and public privacy issues that we need to consider when we're talking about these sort of things. Systems like FaceFirst and Argus are used to catch criminals all the time, and that's fantastic. It is. They have been helpful sometimes, but as we saw in the Super Bowl, they're not always effective. Facial recognition is mature, but it's only particularly effective on maybe 1,000, maybe 10,000, a population of about 10,000 people. When you get to more like 100,000 to 1 million, you're going to get a lot of false positives. It's going to say a lot of people that look vaguely similar but aren't the same person. It's going to get them confused. Was that a question you're just raising? Okay. So that's sort of where we're at with the positives. Now some negatives are deepfakes are much more easy to generate than to detect. So you could perhaps inject a deepfake into the CCTV footage of maybe a bank or something like this. And before our recognition systems would have time to understand that that is not a fake image, we could already be responding to what we see. So for instance, a lot of banks will have a facial recognition system camera that will detect when dangerous people come into the bank, and they will alert the authorities so that they can respond more quickly to robberies and so forth. If you were to inject a deepfake video of an active robbery in a bank, the police would respond immediately, drawing the police focus to that bank. Then you can go and rob a bank where they can't respond. It's on the other side of town. So that's one way that can be used to thwart the police as opposed to help them. And then you saw an impersonation of Barack Obama that has been successful in fooling a lot of people. So you can see the opportunities for abuse with these technologies is vast. So facial recognition versus deepfakes. How can we pit these two technologies together? I talked about that a little bit. How can we use facial recognition to detect the deepfakes? The biggest problem we're going to see is that these two technologies build on top of one another. Like I said, those two artificial intelligences that we use to create the deepfakes to compete with one another, the second half of that is a facial recognition model. So as those get better, it's going to be able to create a better deepfake because it's using our methods to test itself. So as we create better methods, they're going to get better methods, and then we have to beat them. It's the Cold War all over again. We have a new arms race. And that's part of why I like to say that technology and computing in particular is the new field of battle. It's the new war that we're fighting. It's not really weapons so much now. It's internet and data. That's really the weapons that we're using on one another. The ethical issues that we need to consider. Facial recognition in schools and public places. This is a big topic. Can we monitor our children all the time? Are we allowed to do that? Is that okay? Is that against the Constitution? We've talked about that today. Law enforcement, how can they use this and how is that legal? How is that allowed? There's this thing called the Ring doorbell a lot of people are using now, and takes a live feed of whatever's happening on your front stoop and sends that to the police. do you own that data? There's a lot of people who are just walking around about their lives in front of your house. They're not on your property, they're not breaking the law, but they're still getting their videos sent to the police. Is that ethical? Then the deepfakes, we have all kinds of issues like this, the impersonations, the disseminating of fake news. Recently, China has released some legislation where if you release a video that has a deepfake in it and you don't tell the Chinese government this is a deepfake, and I've flagged it as a deepfake beforehand, they can lock you up and fine you something like $100,000 US. It's become pretty serious. So, and then on the other hand, the Chinese government is in charge of deciding whether or not a video is a deepfake. There's not a whole lot of recourse in that bill to come up with that. So say I come up with some sort of factual evidence that the Chinese government doesn't like, they can say, no, that's a deepfake. We're going to lock him up. This is fake news, when in fact it was real. So it's important to have high specificity tools for determining deepfakes that can be validated so that we don't have that issue of some person saying it's a deepfake and that's the last word. There has to be a universally accepted and highly specific way to determine whether or not it is a deepfake. And then that arms race as well that I referred to earlier. And I have a good many sources. If anyone wants to learn more about this, I'm happy to share these. And that's all I have. Any questions? Thank you. No? Very good. So, computer vision is basically anything that allows a computer to understand the visual world. Like say a camera, if it's not the ability for it to see the world, because you just turn on a webcam, the computer has vision, it can see everything, but it doesn't understand. Computer vision is writing algorithms and processes that allow that computer to take some sort of visual data, whether that's sonar to understand how far something away is, or LiDAR or something like this, or just a picture, and take that back to actually interpretable data. And how can we actually be actionable about that?
Aren't the algorithms themselves controversial right now, and how they're being used?
Some of them are. The ones, it sort of depends. Some of them are so deeply baked into how we do things and they're known to be basically foolproof. There are some newer ones, particularly the facial recognition models. Those are highly contested because they rely on a lot of technologies that aren't fully proven. And like she mentioned, there is a sort of a race factor where some of these technologies don't perform as well on all populations just because of the limits of the current technology. Like say, if we were to expand to use also LiDAR, which is basically sonar with lasers, so you can get a high density map of distances from an object, that might be more helpful than just a picture with, say, African-American facial recognition, because you'd be able to track the contours in the face as opposed to just a flat image that may, like shading and things like this are a much bigger issue with African Americans because their pigmentation is darker. And so shading and lighting has a much bigger issue on that. So if we use more highly specific technologies, we can be more effective.
So hello everyone, my name is Jay Halverson, and today I'm going to be presenting to you about the future of AR and VR. So some predictions here, some statistics. So a lot has been made possible with AR and VR, but there is still more to be done. And it's predicted by 2020, a third of the global consumers are expected to be using VR devices. And by 2022, it is estimated that 3.5 billion AR devices are expected to be in use. That's a lot of people considering we have, I think, 7.6 billion people on the earth, but 2022 we're going to have a lot more. So it's probably around a third of consumers. So first we got to talk about what is AR and VR. So augmented reality is an interactive experience in real-world environment where objects can reside in a virtual environment with computer-generated perceptual information. So like right here, you got Pokemon Go, you got a little Pikachu right there in the little background. Or if you want to like see what furniture looks like, you can use the AR toolkit, which I'll get into later. And those are some examples of how it, and AR has a lot of business owners to change the decor of their office before actual changes take place. So it's a lot cheaper than just renting stuff. And then now virtual reality is it's kind of similar to AR, but it's different. And it is a simulated experience that is very similar to or completely different from the real world. And a lot, okay, that's a typo. There are a range of systems that are used in VR, such as headsets. omnidirectional treadmills, and special gloves. So like the guy right here, he's in a virtual environment and he's boxing. So, and some companies who are using that is Samsung and, what was the other one? Oculus, there it is. So assumptions have been made, which is it analyzes your, like it hacks your system, it blurs the line between the real world and digital world, so you don't know what's real and what's not. So like this guy, he's stuck in his own virtual world and he might get hit by a car. And developing AR and VR systems can be very expensive. It's more expensive to develop these than console games. So my point of view is as a computer science major at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, or UNCC for short, and I'm also an avid Pokemon Go player. Like coming to this summit, I actually was playing Pokemon Go, so I know it's an old game, but I'm half Japanese, okay? I like Pokemon. So some milestone moments. In 1968, Ivan Sutherland created the first VR head-mounted display. So it was kind of the first VR device being used. In 2000, Hirokazu Kato of the Nara Institute of Science and Technology created the AR toolkit, which I mentioned earlier. And it's kind of the first device where you can capture real-world actions and combine it with interactions of virtual objects. So kind of basically put a device there, put like a trash can there, see what it looks like. Okay, and that's what it kind of looks like right there. So there's that little creature right there. In 2010, one of the most well-known VR devices was created by Palmer Luckey, which was the Oculus Rift. And that really popularized what people didn't know what VR was until they found out about that. In 2016, Pokemon Go was released. So I didn't know about AR until I started playing Pokemon Go. I did more research on it, and I was like, oh, AR, that's really cool, actually. And more AR apps have been made throughout after that release. So the advantages of AR and VR is it improves learning environments. So like for education, it can be more immersive, thus encouraging better participation. And it's more fun to do that. And it can allow product developers to see and experience mock-up designs, like I said earlier. And VR can be used to train employees, especially in dangerous environments. So like the military, you can't train in like shooting other soldiers. You gotta figure out a way to train these soldiers, and that's one way to do it. And some AR games build upon the idea of users traveling on foot, like me. Like I've walked multiple kilometers in Pokemon Go that this is why I'm this skinny, I guess, I don't know. And some ethics, though. There are some concerns that AR and VR products can be used for facial recognition, so that's a big concern. But one of the main concerns is that there's no regulatory infrastructure in place to moderate the development and deployment of AR and VR devices. So in games, you got like video game addiction and so kind of stuff like that, but AR and VR, no one knows really about it. There's not really any laws about it. I mean, Pokemon Go, it only gives me like a warning when I'm a passenger playing it, but in all honesty, I'm actually driving and playing it, so don't take after me, please. And so what's the future look like? So in public safety and healthcare, it's all about training them, getting more immersive with them, providing just more ways to do it, like healthcare, like practice performing heart surgery in an immersive environment. Education, like ABC Mouse is trying to, what I've heard is they're trying to experiment like with students a lot throughout the school systems, and they're trying to figure out more ways to make their system more immersive, like more games and stuff. Business, you don't have to go to work anymore. Just go work at home. You can meet with them at home. In conclusion, with more and more AR and VR devices on the market, both show a lot of promise. Though there are negatives associated with AR and VR, it is necessary to keep researching because there are a lot of positives associated with these devices. And those are my sources. And if you guys have any questions, and please no hard ones. No? Good.